For more on news from around Washington and how it might be affecting you, let's bring in Steve Dorsey and Olivia Gazis. Steve is a CBS News correspondent, and Olivia is CBS News' intelligence and national security reporter. President Biden is calling for Russian President Vladimir Putin to be tried for war crimes. Here's more of what he said coming back from a weekend trip to Delaware.
You may remember I got criticized for calling Putin a war criminal. Well, the truth of the matter, you saw what happened in Bucha. This warrants him, he is a war criminal. But we have to gather the information. We have to continue to provide Ukraine with the weapons they need to continue the fight. And we have to gather all the detail so this can be have a war crime trial.
Steve, is this another expression of the president's personal feelings or a call for actual legitimate political action?
Ed, I think it's both. I think this is a case of the president reacting to those images we've been seeing in Bucha of mutilated bodies of corpses around that town near Kyiv. It's also a bit of catch-up, too. Remember, the president was in Wilmington this weekend. We really didn't hear much from him as the world was discovering these atrocities. In fact, he was golfing on Sunday. Now he's following the lead of other world leaders, including those in Europe, responding to this tragedy. He's also trying to build the international political case for a trial, a war crimes trial against Vladimir Putin and other Kremlin leaders in perhaps the International Criminal Court at The Hague, and trying to build that momentum here in the U.S. to join forces with political allies.
And Olivia, President Biden's comments come after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation that the Russians have clearly committed genocide.
Indeed, this is genocide. The elimination of the whole nation and the people. We are the citizens of Ukraine. We have more than 100 nationalities. This is about the destruction and extermination of all these nationalities.
So, Olivia, based on the conversations that you've had with your sources, what would bringing a case against Vladimir Putin in an international court actually look like?
It's a really good question, Elaine, not least because this is the details of how this would work are still murky. Neither the U.S. nor Russia nor Ukraine are parties to something like the International Criminal Court. So there are still questions about which body would have the best jurisdiction, how evidence collection should work, and how high responsibility for these alleged crimes could go. Because just like in any other judicial proceeding, even though these images that we're seeing are searing, they seem patently obvious, there is still a burden of proof that has to be met when it comes to assigning individual criminal responsibility. So the ICC does have an inquiry open already, specifically for alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity. Genocide has a different legal definition. So even if the Ukrainians are alleging that's what's happening on the ground right now, it remains to be seen whether the ICC or others start to use that term. For now, NATO, the US, President Biden have opted not to use it. But we know the ICC, the UN, the EU, the US all have efforts on the ground documenting what's happening, trying to ultimately build and bring a case against Russia, potentially against individual military commanders, and yes, potentially against President Putin once they have that evidence accumulated.
And it sure seems that evidence gathering is continuing at a pretty quick pace. Olivia, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan today also offered new details about how Russian forces may be repositioning themselves for another offensive. What's the latest U.S. assessment of Russia's aims in Ukraine?
That's right. So Jake Sullivan laid this out in remarkable detail today. He said that Russia was revising its war aims in Ukraine, moving away from this attempted takeover of the entire country to a more focused offensive in the eastern and southern parts of Ukraine. These are areas that would still be significantly larger than the territories that the Russians or Russian proxies managed to take over after the invasion in 2014. So the U.S. assessment is now that Russia is going to reduce its scope, reduce its lines of attack, but not necessarily change its tactics, unfortunately. So this brutal targeting of civilians that we've seen, which is being done in an apparent effort to really break Ukraine's resolve, is likely to continue, Sullivan said, and is likely to be protracted. And on that point, I think it's really worth noting he was specifically asked if President Putin would have signed off on this level of violence, or if this could have just been the work of, rogue fighters on the ground. He said, without commenting on specific intelligence in Bucha, that the targeting of dissidents and anyone who opposed Russia's takeover was no accident. He said what we've seen in Bucha was, quote, part of the plan.
Well, Olivia, both Germany and France are kicking a number of Russian diplomats out of their countries following the Russian military's actions in Bucha. Why had they been allowed to remain until now?
Yeah, so these are sizable expulsions by both the Germans and the French. They follow a number of other European countries who've done similar things in recent weeks. I think the Netherlands, Ireland, Belgium, the Czech Republic, Poland all did something similar. These are in most cases Russian officers who are being referred to kind of colloquially as diplomats, but are really spies operating under diplomatic cover. And it's kind of the informal but very long established way that espionage has been conducted. Every country does it, and every country has a sort of level of tolerance for it. The reason that it works that way is that local governments can derive benefits from having foreign spies on their soil. They can sort of track who they're talking to, so it is useful from a counterintelligence perspective to have them there, even though there are risks involved. It also makes them very common fodder for these tit-for-tat diplomatic measures when tensions escalate in the way that they have. So these moves that Germany and France and others have taken are no doubt to send a very public message to Russia, but also to privately curtail Russia's eyes and ears on the ground in European capitals across the area.
Steve, back here in Washington, senators agreed to a new $10 billion in COVID preparedness aid, at least $12 billion less than what the White House initially wanted. Do we know what's in and out of this package and its likelihood of passage?
Yeah, and in fact, just within the last hour or so, we got press releases from Democrats and Republicans touting the billions of dollars that are in this proposed bill that include new money for things like vaccination efforts and testing. It also includes money to research and develop therapeutics to treat the disease. What's not in this is something that Democrats have really lashed out about, and the White House has long supported, and that is efforts and money to fund the global vaccination effort led by the U.S. Chuck Schumer, the Senate Democratic leader, said in a press release today that this money would be designed to help combat the potential for any future global variants like Omicron that could impact the U.S. He says that he's optimistic about working with Republicans this spring to develop a second supplemental spending bill that could help address those efforts. In the meantime, Republicans and Democrats are working to advance this in Congress before they take their end of week Easter recess.
And Steve, on West Wing Watch. Sorry, Ed, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, we'll see how quickly that thing gets passed and whether Republicans try to amend it at all, but a good sign at least that there's some kind of bipartisan agreement. But go ahead, Elaine.
So, Steve, I was just going to ask before we let you go, White House Press Secretary Jenssakis resumed her place at the White House press briefing after her COVID diagnosis, and she comes back to a number of reports about her future. What are you hearing?
Yeah, Elaine, there's been lots of reports, lots of questions directed to her at the White House press briefings about how long she has left at the podium at the White House, whether reports are true that she's in fact in discussions with MSNBC to join their team after she departs the White House, perhaps as early as next month. It raises some issues in transparency and ethics. Can she answer fairly questions from potential employers like MSNBC while she's engaged in negotiations with them? Jenssakis won't confirm any of those reports. She says she's focused on leading the communications with reporters and the press strategy at the White House, and she continues to do so, she says.
Well, Steve Dorsey and Olivia Gazis, we thank you both for helping us kick off the week.
Thank you.